During the election of 1800, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both were running for president of the United States. This is when we were going to choose the third president, and Adams lost to Jefferson. So Jefferson is going to become the third president of the United States in the election of 1800. Jefferson is one of the best known presidents in American history. He was also a very diverse individual with many accomplishments. Among those include a lawyer, an architect, designer. He studied ancient Roman and Greek architecture and designed his house, Monticello, to have a dome on top of it. And when you go to Washington, D.C., you notice buildings that have the dome ceiling or the dome roof on top, those were compliments of Jefferson and his design element with this dome. You'll see it on the Jefferson Monument and the Capitol building. And so he advised the architects during the building of Washington, D.C. He was also a great violinist. He was an inventor and an amateur scientist, invented such things as a 7-day clock and a dumbwaiter to carry objects from the bottom floor up and drop it back down. And he was also a skilled farmer. He owned a plantation as well. So when Jefferson became president, he wanted to limit the powers of the central government. In his mind, under Adams, the central government had become too powerful. So his first step was to end the Alien and Sedition Acts. Again, he thought these acts were unconstitutional, and so he ended that. He also ended many taxes, and he reduced government spending by cutting government jobs and reducing the military size. So he didn't feel it was necessary to have as many government jobs as we had, and he also didn't feel like it was necessary to have such a large standing army. So by cutting these jobs, he was able to save quite a bit of money, thus allowing him to cut down on taxes for the public. The fourth thing he did quickly was he used tariff and land sale revenue to reduce public debt. So his goal was to reduce our debt, but at the same time pull the central government's influence away a little bit and give the states a little more power. In 1803, Jefferson was faced with a decision. We talked about the Judiciary Act of 1801, in which John Adams appointed judges at the very last minute to the federal courts throughout the country. And one of the men that he appointed was William Marbury, and he was going to be a federal judge in Washington, D.C. So he gets appointed right before Adams leaves office, and Jefferson steps in after inauguration. And Marbury expects Jefferson and Madison, his Secretary of State, to appoint Marbury to his federal court position that Adams had promised him. But Madison refused to appoint Marbury because it was not a decision made by Jefferson, the current president, and it had not been instated before Adams left. So Marbury sues Madison, and it goes all the way to the Supreme Court. This court case is very important. It's called Marbury versus Madison, and it was established, or it happened in 1803. Remember that John Marshall is a Chief Justice, and though he's a Federalist, which is the opposite on the political spectrum of Jefferson and Madison, he actually sides with Madison. But that's not the important part of the case. The important part of the case is that in his final decision, when he wrote out his decision, he basically established this new power for the judicial branch, which is called judicial review. So the Supreme Court case, this is the Supreme Court case which establishes the power of judicial review. Judicial review means that the U.S. Supreme Court has the final say in interpreting the Constitution. They have the power to rule laws unconstitutional. By establishing this duty of the court system, of the judicial branch, it really levels out the checks and balances and makes the judicial branch equal in their powers to the executive and the legislative branch. Okay, one of the biggest impacts that Thomas Jefferson had while president was when he made the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. The Louisiana Purchase was when Jefferson agreed to purchase Louisiana Territory from France for $15 million. France owned Louisiana Territory, but they were at war under Napoleon in Europe, and Napoleon needed money. Jefferson had asked Napoleon to sell the port of New Orleans, the city of New Orleans, to him for $10 million. And Napoleon considered it and really needed money to fund the war he had going on in Europe. So he made a counteroffer with Jefferson and said, "Why don't I sell you all of the Louisiana Territory for $15 million?" Now, when I'm talking about Louisiana Territory, I'm not talking about present-day Louisiana. I'm talking about this entire piece of land here. This was all part of the Louisiana Territory. As you can see, it is very large, and it would be crazy not to accept all of this land for such a cheap price. So Thomas Jefferson was conflicted because of his belief in the interpretation of the Constitution, but in the end he felt that it was what was best for the nation, and so he agreed to the purchase, asked Congress to agree to the purchase, and the purchase was made in 1803. Now, the most significant thing about the Louisiana Purchase is that it doubled the size of the U.S. You can see here is the U.S. in 1787. These were the 13 colonies. This was the land we gained after the American Revolution. And this is our new piece of land that we gained in 1803. You can see that it doubles the size of the United States. After we purchased the land, we needed to see what was on it because we had never truly explored this area. So we sent out the Lewis and Clark expedition, who left from St. Louis, or near St. Louis. They sailed up the rivers, they traveled over the mountains, they met Sacagawea, and in the end they made it all the way to the Pacific coast, and then they came back. We'll talk more in detail about Lewis and Clark expedition in class, but what you need to remember is that Lewis and Clark's expedition opened up this movement to the west, because when they came back and they told everyone the land is good, it's plentiful, there's wildlife to live off of and all of that, people started moving west, and we're going to see a large movement across this part of the United States.